Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around we are an MP hero at Ridge playing as the Force of the Skaven against the Force of the Vampire Counts. And, well, the Skaven patch is coming, it's just a few days away, a little over, basically just a week now. And I wanted to give the Skaven a last hurrah before we get a bunch of new units, and hopefully the Skaven become a much more competitive faction. And currently Skaven... No, I'd say they're probably the weakest faction in the game. There are people who disagree with me. Some would argue Beastmen or Lizardmen are also pretty bad. Though personally, I don't agree. I think both Beastmen and Lizards are in a much better spot currently. But yeah, I wanted to try out one last bit of Skaven, and go figure my opponent counterpicks me the Vampire Counts, which is probably one of, if not the worst matchups for the Skaven. Because Fear and Terror is not something the Ratties deal very well with. They kind of struggle to protect their backline against things like Vargulfs and zombie summons and heavy cav and all that sort of thing. So definitely not the greatest matchup for him, but I figured, you know what, let's have some fun. Let's try to do something a little crazy. So as you can see here, the numbers are pretty extreme. I wanted to go super wide, and my idea for this build here, and I kind of forgot just how the way this map is designed. I thought that you had a little more space here in the middle. So my idea was that I'm going to go super wide, deploy cannons in 3 separate batteries, and force my opponent to split his attention. That way he can't just spam me with summons. He can't just overwhelm my backline and compromise my artillery super effectively. And I'll be able to get more shots off. So either way, go into this build. For my lord, I'm rolling with a Gracier of Ruin. Well, there's not much to be said for him. Gracier of Ruin is alright. Usually you see Skrulk, but I didn't want to run Skrulk in. Also, I wanted to have the ability to snare flyers, because of course bats as well as Vargeists, even in this matchup. Terrorgeists also are all pretty nasty, and I wanted to have something to shut them down. So we've got a Warpstorm Scroll. This is your sort of item you can get. It causes damage to enemy flyers, and it doesn't pin them in place, but it just does do damage to them. And then of course we do have Howling Warpkill, which is a net spell. So I've got a slow against flyers as well as a damage dealer, and then a net. So that's very, very solid. Besides that, we are mounted on the Screaming Bell, so we've got Unholy Clamor, which is great, getting more leadership and vigor map wide. Mostly, especially the leadership is just very important for the Skaven to try to keep them in line. Wall of Unholy Sound will be buffing my troops when they're close by. Scorch, a nice little bounce spell if my opponent goes with slightly more elite infantry. Warp Lightning, once again to deal with infantry blobs. And then Death Frenzy, because it grants immunity to psychology. It's a fairly cheap spell, and if you overcast it, it costs 12, but you get an AoE for 40 meters, which is really, really nice. And finally, we do have Arcane Conduits. We're going to be able to spam some spells. And mounted on a chariot like this, we'll be able to run all over enemy infantry, which is really, really nice. Now, besides that, well, our army's kind of divided into 3 batteries. Each of these is a Warp Lightning Cannon, a Stormvermin team, and then a unit of Plague Monks. And you might be wondering why the Plague Monks? Well, it's because if my opponent brings bats, or to a lesser extent direwolves, who don't have great melee defense. You can actually see here, these guys, the direbacks only got 21 melee defense, these guys only have 14, so that's less important. But especially bats, they've got very high melee defense, and a unit like Stormvermin will take forever to kill a unit of bats. They've only got 24 melee attack, bats have like 44 melee defense, I think. So Stormvermin will take years to kill bats, and by then you might have lost your Warp Lightning crew, you might have been tied down for too long, your opponent might have compromised you with other units at that point, and you can't afford that. So I want the Plague Monks there. Plague Monks can also chop through summons pretty effectively. And I kind of figured my opponent might be trying some sort of summon spam shenanigans, and I really wanted those Plague Monks there. So there's a unit of Plague Monks in behind every artillery piece as well, usually hidden in the trees. Besides that, front line simply Clanrat Spears, looking to stall my opponent and buy me some time. 5 units of them, and then 4 units of Skaven Slaves in the back to provide further zoning. We don't have any high mass units, which is definitely a bit of a risk against units like Vargulfs, but I figured, you know what, we can risk it. We're just going to have so much trash in my opponent's way that we can hopefully pull it off. Now for my opponent, you can already see his Devils of Schwarzhofen here are getting slaughtered by the Warp Lightning Cannon, and he's gone with a somewhat gimmicky build. For his Lord, he's rolling with the Red Duke, who's over here. He's actually brought his full spell kit, which is not what you want to be doing. Or maybe it is the full spell kit. He's also got Foe Seeker, he's got Elsif as well, so he's going to be able to debuff me and potentially snipe my Lord. And the Red Duke's a nasty duelist. Now, perhaps less powerful than the Blood Dragon nowadays, but still very, very mean. Mean customer. There's also 2 Vargulfs in there, chevroned up a bit. Perhaps my opponent just didn't have the points he needed after spending so much on zombies, and he didn't really know what to spend on. Either way, 2 Vargulfs. Vargulfs are disgusting against Skaven. Skaven really struggle to stop them. They don't have great high mass units, and the few units they have that can deal with them, like Hell Pit Abominations or Rat Ogres, will struggle against the rest of the roster that the Undead can bring. And there's also the fact that Undead can just kind of run away. Vargulfs are quick. They can run away if they want to. My opponent also did bring a Necromancer, who's also got all of his spells, which is perhaps a bit of a mistake. Or definitely a bit of a mistake. You always, Rod of Unholy Power is great, which he didn't bring here. Or Rod of Forbidden Power. And then, honestly, you just need, like, Summons and Invocation of Neck or something. So my opponent's kind of stiffing himself here as far as his amount of troops goes. He could definitely have a little bit more on the field, but he's not doing it because he's got so much invested in spells, which is not something you want. The front line here, composed entirely of zombie trash, so we've got 6 units of zombies covering the Claw of Nagash, which will be able to melt my infantry blobs. There's also these Devils of Schwarzhofen, which perhaps my opponent was hoping would tear out or harass my backline, but they are getting slaughtered. My opponent not doing a good job protecting them or keeping them safe, and they are getting messed up by those Warp Lightning shots, just decimated and in some really bad shape. They do fly close to the Claw of Nagash, which will start helping them regen, but still, it's going to be very slow, and they're not going to be getting models back. On this flank, we also do have the Dire Pack as well, Dire Wolves, so definitely some harassment there. And immediately, I was trying to get the most possible damage out on these Devils, on my opponent's high-value targets. So you can see we kind of split our fire here. One of my Warp Lightning cannons teeing off on the Red Duke and the Vargulfs. I was trying to force my opponent to split his attention so I could pick some units off. He does summon some zombies here. Not entirely sure why that is, but you can see the Necromancer is immediately coming under some Withering Fire, while these Vargeists over here are just getting slaughtered. They're down to 7 models and about a fifth of their HP, which is really bad. Unfortunately, the Warp Lightning Cannon they're missing because my opponent just halted. But every time he slips up with his micro a little bit, some of his units are getting pounded. You can see the Vargulf here losing a bit of HP. About 700 or so. These Vargeists are basically gone. They take another hit, just clocking them. And it's actually crazy that they survive with 3 models at this stage, even though they've lost almost everything. And my opponent here is going to make a clutch save with Invocation and Hex, saving these boys before they die. But Overcast and Hex definitely wasted there. Bit of a misplay. Perhaps my opponent was a bit of a new player. Most likely he was, because you never want to use an Overcast and Hex like that. And I actually thought these guys would crumble, so I shift my fire now onto the Claw of Nagash and start pounding away at it, looking to kill it and the Necromancer as quick as I can. You can see in the meantime, we are flexing some of our troops around. I'm actually realizing my opponent doesn't have any large to harass this central cannon. I've actually shifted to the Stormman over here, looking to interdict those Vargulfs. While in the meantime, my Plague Monks are falling back, so they don't get caught by these big, large targets they're not very good against. In the meantime, these boys are just standing steady, looking to zone off my opponent if he pushes through. You can see I'm just trying to sit tight here with these Plague Monks, hoping my opponent tries to blitz through the woods here so I can ambush him. Now, the front lines are going to meet. You can see the Necromancer there taking a volley from the Warp Lightning Cannons, which is going to be devastating. The Necromancer cannot hold up to firepower of this magnitude, and he is falling apart. He's crumbling. That means he can't cast an Invocation of the Neck on himself to heal himself, which is going to be disastrous. And you can see there he's falling apart. He gets shot again and again and just crumbles. And now all the guns are going to focus on the Claw of Nagash, looking to knock it out and put it into the dirt. Except these guys. These are actually shooting against the Vargulf. You can see here we are kind of setting up on an interdiction course, trying to make sure these guys can't get into my backline. Unfortunately, a bit of a misplay here on my part. I actually pushed these Plague Monks forward, thinking I might need to intercept new zombie summons. And then I forgot to pull them back, so my opponent very sneakily here is sneaking through with these Dire Pack, but you can see already Bounce of Power definitely swinging in our favor. These Warp Lightning Cannons over here whittling down that Vargulf when my opponent stood still. Definitely paying for it. And you can see now the Clan Rats. Now, Clan Rats not an amazing unit by any stretch of the imagination, but their stats compared to zombies are amazing. These guys are basically chosen in comparison to zombies, so they do pretty well there. And my opponent here does get his Dire Pack and Dire Wolves into the cannon because I wasn't positioned to intercept them. These Plague Monks, despite Death Frenzy and buffs from Unholy Clamor, are not going to be able to save the guns, who get knocked out completely. My opponent just slaughters the crew here, and it completely shatters these boys. So, unfortunately, crew lost. This Warp Lightning Cannon is not making a comeback, and I do believe they actually shortly shatter. They're broken right now, but I know that they got completely removed from play eventually. There you go. You can see they finally did shatter, and they're fleeing somewhere in here. In the meantime, though, my opponent does actually shuffle over to this flank over here while I wasn't paying attention because these Plague Monks were fighting the Vargulf. Now, the Vargulf finally does crumble, which is very good, but I wasn't fast enough to intercept the push on the cannon, and so my opponent here doing a good job shutting me down. He does get a Wind of Death, which melts some rats, but honestly just wasted. You don't really need... Don't use Wind of Death like this, honestly. Would have been much better off using Invocation of the Heck or Summons or units like that to compromise me. Even with the game swinging this badly against him, that still would have been a better bet. Unfortunately, this Warp Lightning Cannon here does rout, and that's definitely been an issue for me. And you can see the Red Duke now gunning for the Grazeseer alongside this Vargulf and the Mortis Engine. And I'm going to be getting slowed by the Mortis, which is definitely going to be making life difficult. All these troops are now getting melted by the Mortis Engine, which is really, really bad. My opponent dropping summons left and right, looking to cripple me. And the poor Priest here just running for dear life. My opponent here didn't use LC. I don't know if you used it already, if you just forgot about it. Well, that's a small Slaving Grace here as we're fleeing for dear life. Unfortunately, the cannon's kind of getting my way. Definitely a little unfortunate. We're just trying to maneuver to safety. Meantime, the artillery pieces here barraging the Claw of Nagash. Claw of Nagash does have magic resist, in fact. And unfortunately here, huge misplay on my part, really kind of getting screwed by the auto-targeting. I wanted to cast Death Frenzy on my blob over here, because obviously they get a huge benefit from that. Immediate psychology, extra damage output. And unfortunately, auto-locked on a crew member. I assumed the crew member was somewhere in this blob. It auto-locked on a crew member, and instead my Warp Lightning Cannon got the full added effect area, which means none of these guys are getting it. So I got completely screwed there. That definitely sucked. But fortunately, it doesn't really matter. Most of these guys are sticking around. The Skaven Slay Spears are out, but they're expendable, so they're not going to affect the leadership of everybody else here. And Vargul's actually getting torn apart. And my opponent here, perhaps with some cycle charging, could do more damage. But the rats are staying on him. The Warp Lightning Cannon is still pounding away. One of them did stay online. It's actually gained 3 chevrons over the course of this game, just doing insane amounts of work. This Warp Lightning Cannon over here is now being remanned by the crew from this Warp Lightning Cannon. That's a cool thing. If you guys don't know this, if it's the same artillery piece, not a Regiment of Renown, it's got to be the same just generic artillery piece, you can actually use a crew from a different artillery piece to reman it. So I knew that obviously I couldn't get in on this piece with all the zombie summons and Red Duke and stuff. So I put the crew on this artillery piece here, and they're going to be able to start wailing away at these high value targets. In the meantime, the Greyseer are actually very close to dying. He's actually losing a lot of HP. 100 armor, not going to save him against the hatred from the Red Duke, who of course does have Frenzy and some monstrous melee stats. And unfortunately, when I did try to order this guy to keep running, he decides to turn and fight, which is a stupid move if I ever saw one. So he's going to get clocked there by the Red Duke. But he is fleeing. You can see here we are actually going to collapse inward on these guys. The last bastion of the vampire counts is being overrun. The Claw of Nagash finally getting shot to death despite its magic resist. It's just not able to endure. Gets torn down, and suddenly this entire pocket is free of that oppressive aura. And my opponent's at this point the balance of power shifts, and my opponent's army shatters to army losses. So a brutal fight at the end there, but definitely I think my opponent's early hesitation and certain build mistakes hurt him a good bit. Now, to be quite honest, I do actually think this is a decent build against vampire counts in the current meta with Skaven. It's not amazing, perhaps, but then again, nothing you do as Skaven against vampire counts is going to be that amazing. It's just a very difficult matchup. But being able to spread out, especially on a more open map, and this was actually a bit of a misplay on this map, because this map is more compact, and the central area, that central ridge, is very close and confined, or more confined than I thought it was. For some reason, I thought in my head that it's wider, and I'm going to have more room to deploy wide. But I couldn't really do that without losing, or without the arc of my Warp Lightning Cannons being blocked by the snow walls or the snow banks or the hills or whatever, and I couldn't. So that was a bit of a mistake. I ended up sort of compromising me a little bit, because those hounds, when they took out the dire pack, when they took out one cannon, they were immediately able to bounce over to the second one, and that was kind of what I'd hoped to avoid. So definitely a bit of an issue, but at least it protected me a little bit from summon spam. It made it more difficult for my opponent to get summons off and effectively shut multiple things down, or potentially would have done that had my opponent been better about getting in on the backline. But yeah, I do think this is a decent build. I'm definitely looking forward. I think with the patch, we might have some more options as Skaven, though to be honest, I think the main changes are going to be the Regiments of Renown, giving you certain bits of immunity psychology and Unbreakable Stormmen and that sort of stuff. As for the actual sort of shooting, I'm not actually sure you're really going to want Rattling guns or Warplock Jezzails against vampire counts. Both are obviously pretty potent, but both are pretty easy to shut down. So even with the changes to summons being made weaker now, they obviously crumble, and they suffer leadership penalties, or they have normal leadership. Even with those changes implemented, I still think artillery pieces might be a better way to go. We'll see. Especially the Rattling guns might actually be decent at like point defense. And the Jezzails could be good at sniping your opponent from afar. So we'll see how it plays out, certainly. But I'm not entirely sure the weapons teams will really be the changing factor. Another thing that might change things a little bit is the Doomflayers could potentially tie down annoying units like Vargul's, which currently is just impossible. Now for my opponent's build here, my main critique is one, the chevrons of the Vargul's, which is total waste, and second of all the spells he brought on the Red Duke and the Necromancer. Now personally, I'm not a huge fan of the Devil's Retorts often either, or the Claw of Nagash for that matter. I feel like both are kind of overkill against the game. You don't really need them. The Devil's Retorts often an easy target when you can probably just bring like 3 or 4 bats to compromise your opponent's backline. But the main mistake, of course, is that magic spam. Like if we go into our custom games and look at how much my opponent paid for that, where's the Red Duke? So he brought a Red Duke on a horse with all of his kit. And if you strip this down, look at that. You're paying 2,600. If he just cut off all those spells, he's now paying 2,110. Same thing with the Necromancer. Necromancer on a horse. You're paying for all these spells. You strip that down. You don't need two. You don't need 2 Dance Macabres. Maybe you do want 2 Invocations and the heck. And obviously, you'll probably want the 2 summons. That's usually what you bring Necromancer for. Look at that. You're going from 1,300 gold to 672. So you've cut about 1,100 gold cost from your army right there. Now then stack that on top of the 2 Vargulfs that he chevroned up. I do believe it was like 2 gold, or 2, I think it was like 2 or something there, and then like 2 gold. Look at how much money you're spending in those chevrons. That's another 700 gold you've got kind of squandered. You don't need to pay that much. Honestly, with all that gold you could have saved, you got your 6 zombies. Let's say you do want you want the Claw of Nagash and the Devils of Schwarzhofen, and you want the Dire Wolves and Dire Pack, which aren't a bad choice actually. You still have 1,700 gold now. That's freed up, and you can use that for much more valuable units. You can throw the Sternsmen in there. You can throw some Black Knights in there. You can throw some Bats in there to compromise backlines more. Really, what I'd probably do is cut some of these zombies and get some Graveguard. Bring like the Sternsmen, bring a unit of Graveguard in there. If you want to be really a piece of garbage, you could bring triple Vargulf. Now, this isn't going to get you any brownie points, especially not with me. This is definitely a very cheesy build, but you could do like triple Vargulf, Claw of Nagash, and then bring like a bunch of Direwolves. Something like this. Either way, I just wanted to show just how much of a cost difference it makes if you just cut out those chevrons and those spells you aren't going to use. Because let's be honest, the Wind of Death there didn't pay for itself. It did nothing, basically. It killed a few Skaven models. Who cares? He never even used Curse of Years. No use for Claw of Nagash. It's just a trash spell. You don't need all those spells doubled up. So paying 1,300 gold or whatever for spells, or I don't know, 1,100 gold for spells, and then another 600 for chevrons. Big mistake, guys. Don't do that. And that's really my main critique there of my opponent's build. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. I hope you found it entertaining, fun to see a little bit of ratties before they are changed for all eternity, hopefully for the better. If you have any comments, any criticism, any questions, don't hesitate to post them. I'll do my very best to respond as soon as I can. I do thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye for now.